Islam. I'm approaching this particular subject with some caution, and in light of the incoming new legislation on Islamophobia, um, the word in itself is a contradiction in terms, and also at the risk of being cancelled by the fun police. I do not wish to offend, but merely to inform. To some, what I'm saying might be obvious, but what I believe we need to do ultimately as a nation is to ask ourselves, so what? Once I've finished, you'll understand what I'm saying. The reason I'm doing this is to quell the myth that not all Muslims are the same. And in the UK, a vast majority are good, God-fearing people, many of whom are as patriotic about this great country as we are. However, the extremist elements present by far the greatest risk to life, security, and stability globally, and certainly here in the UK. Much of what I'm talking about also applies to most European countries, to Australia, and to Canada. We're reaching a decision point soon in the future for our country, and our relationship with Islam is critical, and it's a fundamental part of this. There are 57 recognized Muslim countries in the world today, and Muslims are over 25% of the world's population. In the UK, there are 4 million Muslims, which make up about 6% of the population. 2% of the population of Scotland are Muslim, and just under 1% of the population in Northern Ireland are Muslim. The Muslim population has tripled in the last 20 years, and it's projected to be nearer 10% of the UK population in 10 years' time. But why do I feel as though I'm qualified to talk about this? I've served in the army in many countries where I have been fighting against Islamic armies. I've been fighting terrorism against Islamic extremists, and noticed there's a difference between the two. I've been witness to and have protected Muslim communities from other Muslim communities. And I've also been in a position where I've been protecting and I've been witness to the horrors of ethnic cleansing being imposed on Muslim communities by Christians. And also as a civilian, I've lived, worked, and fully integrated into Muslim countries in the Middle East and Africa for the last 10 years. And I've had the privilege of engaging with everyone from Islamic leaders, politicians, imams, and the normal, if you can call them that, normal Muslim people. Some of my closest and best friends are Muslim. I'm hated and have been attacked by Muslims personally. I've even loved Muslims. I do not profess to know the Quran page by page, but what I have tried to do over the last few years is try to understand the religion as best I possibly can, because I've wanted to integrate with the Muslim community. I'll attempt to pass on what I understand in a kind of Janet and John way, and I look forward to being corrected, and I would encourage you to comment on this. I believe it's important to understand how this all started. So let's start with the Prophet Muhammad, who you will have all heard about. He was born just over 1,500 years ago and is revered as the father of Islam, and according to all Muslims, the greatest man to have ever walked the earth. It was he that was spoken to by Allah and passed those teachings on to scholars who then wrote the core verses of the Quran. And of course, the Quran are the holy scriptures that underpin Islam. Going back to the Prophet Muhammad, as a young man, and so ashamed and embarrassed was he with what he witnessed in Mecca, which is in Saudi Arabia, which at the time of when he was a young man was a pit of debauchery and lawlessness. He went away and he amassed an army of 10,000 men and marched back into Mecca to restore law and order. And he imposed Islamic teachings to everyone, providing a strict set of laws and guidelines to turn Mecca into what it's become today, which is the birthplace of Islam. He had no tolerance. He had a no tolerance approach to this. The people either had to comply or they were executed or displaced. During this period, he led over 80 raids and battles against Muslims, Jews, and Christians. He was also responsible for the execution through ethnic cleansing of between 600 and 800 Jews during this period, which also included the systematic graping of Jewish women from that community. He did indeed have 11 wives during this period, the youngest of which was 9 on the consummation of that marriage. He was also a victim of grape himself, and mentally and emotionally clearly affected by his experiences. I believe that many of the teachings that we now see in the Quran, whilst presented as the word of Allah, the will of Allah, many of them are actually based on the Prophet Muhammad's own moral beliefs and behaviors, which is logical if you think about it, as well as other stories and myths that were taken from other historical sources. And my point here is that the Quran is not just the word of Allah, it's the word of Allah with additional stories from the Prophet Muhammad and also other additional stories and myths taken from different times and different teachings. The Prophet Muhammad spoke extremely highly of Jesus as a great prophet, but not as the Son of God. So in summary, he was clearly a charismatic leader, he was a warlord, he was a visionary, and he was a prophet of Allah. He was the original, greatest prophet of Allah. But he was clearly troubled and suffered from what I would describe as an inevitable narcissism, which I think every great leader in history could be guilty of. But he translated Islam into what we see today. He provided faith and laws that brought discipline and purpose to what was a very ill-disciplined society. And those laws were appropriate to the acceptable and normal behaviors of that time. And that is an important point. What they did in those days is not acceptable in the modern world today. So like Christianity, some elements of Islamic teachings are abhorrent to Western society. For example, child marriage, the abhorrence of homosexuality, never mind transgenderism, the fact that a Muslim man can have 4 wives, but they are still practiced today. And indeed, this is law in some Muslim countries. No sex outside marriage, which is haram, is not tolerated. This is not tolerated in other Islamic countries. Women that stray away from this, even if they are not responsible, are executed by their own fathers. It is that important. Like other religions, however, there is extraordinary hypocrisy across every Muslim society I've come into contact with, particularly from the men. Whilst women in Islam fundamentally are revered as the homemaker and the bearer of the next generation, there is no doubt that they are subjugated to men and a mile away from the equality that's practiced in Western society. It's also considered to be a great honor to martyr oneself than actually to survive in shame. And that is why to die in battle, to suicide yourself, or even sacrifice your children for the greater Muslim cause is considered a great honor.